Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of Salem, Massachusetts. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time at which you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing which places and what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. The year was 1906, and winter had descended upon Salem with unusual severity. Snow drifted against the clapboard houses along Essex Street, piling in corners and against doorways as if attempting to bury the town's infamous history beneath a blanket of pristine white. It was during this particularly harsh January that 29-year-old Nora Blackwood inherited her great-aunt Josephine's house, a weathered Victorian structure at the edge of town that had stood empty for nearly a decade. According to town records filed at the Essex County Registry of Deeds, the property was officially transferred to Nora's possession on January 17, 1906. The document, yellowed but meticulously preserved, bears both the official county seal and a curious notation in the margin that reads simply, "Conditions apply." What these conditions were remains undocumented in any official capacity, though subsequent events would suggest they were far from ordinary. Nora's arrival in Salem was noted briefly in the social section of the Salem Evening News on January 23rd. The short announcement described her as a well-regarded nurse from Boston, coming to claim her inheritance and establish practice in our community. What the newspaper failed to mention was that Nora had never met her great-aunt Josephine, nor had she ever set foot in Salem prior to her inheritance. This curious arrangement, a property bequeathed to a relative who was effectively a stranger, raised few eyebrows in a town accustomed to peculiarities. By all accounts, Nora Blackwood was considered a modern woman for her time. Trained at Massachusetts General Hospital, she had worked alongside doctors during the typhoid outbreak of 1902. Her medical journal from that period, later discovered in a trunk in the attic, reveals a methodical mind, detailed observations of patients, treatments, and outcomes recorded in precise handwriting that rarely betrayed emotion. One entry, dated August 17, 1902, demonstrates her clinical approach. Patient MS continues to decline despite administration of cool baths. Temperature remains elevated at 103.2 degrees, pulse weak but regular. Have noted curious mottling on extremities not typical of typhoid presentation. Consulted with Dr. Warren, who suggests possible secondary infection. Have taken blood sample for examination. The house she inherited stood at the end of a narrow lane that curved away from what is now Bridge Street. Contemporary maps show it situated near the edge of the North River, somewhat isolated from neighboring properties. The structure itself was substantial, 3 stories of weathered gray clapboard with a sharply pitched roof and narrow windows that seemed to regard the street with suspicion. A daguerreotype dated 1875, discovered in the Salem Historical Society archives in 1962, shows the house in its prime, imposing yet oddly proportioned, with a facade that appears slightly asymmetrical despite the architect's apparent attention to classical elements. According to the property assessment conducted in 1901, the house contained 8 bedrooms, 2 parlors, a study, kitchen, and cellar. The assessment also notes a sealed chamber beneath the main floor, though this space is not elaborated upon in the document. The property's value was listed as considerably below similar houses in the area, despite its size and location. A handwritten note from the assessor, Jonathan Wells, on a separate sheet attached to the document reads, "Reduction in valuation due to persistent issues with dampness and questionable structural elements. Owner refuses inspection of certain areas, claiming private research facilities. Recommend future reassessment." What drew Nora to accept this inheritance remains a matter of speculation. Her correspondence with the Salem law firm of Whitaker and Sons, recovered decades later, indicates she was initially hesitant. In a letter dated December 3, 1905, she wrote, "I find it curious that Aunt Josephine, whom I have never met, would bequeath her entire estate to me, rather than to her closer relations. I would appreciate any insight you might have regarding her decision. The response from Thomas Whitaker, dated December 8th, was notably terse. Your great-aunt's wishes were explicit. The property passes to you alone, with the understanding that you will reside within it. Should you decline, the house will be razed and the land donated to the town. No further explanation was provided. A second letter from Nora, dated December 15th, pressed for more information. I must insist on greater clarity regarding this inheritance. What obligations accompany the property? Why was I specifically selected? I have professional commitments in Boston that would make immediate relocation difficult. The firm's response has been lost to time, but Nora's final letter in the sequence, dated December 23rd, suggests she had resigned herself to acceptance. I will arrive on the afternoon train on January 23rd. Please have the house opened and minimally prepared. I shall require only one bedroom to be made habitable immediately, preferably one with eastern exposure. I will see to the remainder myself. The winter of 1906 was documented as one of the coldest on record. The Salem harbor froze solid enough for horse-drawn sleighs to cross to Marblehead. It was against this backdrop of ice and isolation that Nora Blackwood arrived to claim her inheritance, a solitary figure stepping off the train at Salem Station, her medical bag in one hand and a single trunk of possessions in the other. Mrs. Eleanor Putnam, who operated a boarding house on Washington Square, recorded in her personal diary that Nora stayed with her for 3 nights while the old house was prepared. Miss Blackwood seems a serious young woman, she wrote, educated and proper, though there is something in her manner that suggests disquiet. When I inquired about her family connections to Salem, she changed the subject with such deliberateness that I did not venture to ask again. Mrs. Putnam's diary entry for January 24th offers additional insight. Miss B. kept to her room for much of the day, though I heard her pacing well into the night. At breakfast, she inquired about local physicians, particularly any who might have known her great-aunt. When I mentioned Dr. Latham had attended Josephine Blackwood in her final days, Miss B. became quite animated, requesting his address immediately. She returned from her visit to him looking pale and withdrawn, and retired without taking dinner. Dr. Howard Latham's records, preserved in the archives of the Salem Medical Society, contain a brief note regarding this visit. January 24, 1906, received call from Miss Nora Blackwood, great-niece of my former patient J.B., inquired as to the specifics of her aunt's final illness, explained symptoms were consistent with cardiovascular decline, though somewhat unusual in presentation. Subject exhibited extreme agitation when informed of J.B.'s specific request that certain medications be discontinued in her final days. I maintained patient confidentiality regarding other aspects of J.B.'s medical history as bound by professional ethics. Subject departed abruptly. On January 26th, Nora moved into the house. The day was marked by a heavy snowfall that continued through the evening, effectively isolating the property from the rest of the town. According to meteorological records from the Salem Custom House, nearly 14 inches accumulated over the course of that day and night. Thaddeus Green, the caretaker hired by Whitaker and Sons to maintain the property during its vacancy, noted in his ledger, "Delivered Miss Blackwood to the house at 2 p.m. as arranged, weather deteriorating rapidly. The lady seemed most concerned with examining the structural aspects of the building rather than its comforts. Requested I show her the cellar immediately, despite the cold. Spent considerable time studying the foundation walls, measuring distances with a tape she produced from her bag. When I inquired as to her interest, she replied that dimensions can reveal more than appearances. Most peculiar. Left her with provisions as instructed by Mr. Whitaker, though she seemed uninterested in them. Upon departure, observed her examining the seals on the doors to the east wing, which have remained locked since before my employment. What happened during those first few weeks in the house is documented primarily through Nora's own journal, discovered in 1957 during a survey of the property prior to demolition. The journal begins matter-of-factly with observations about the house's condition and needs for repair. The plumbing is satisfactory, though the pipes groan with alarming persistence, she wrote on January 27th. The electrical wiring appears to have been an afterthought, installed with little regard for symmetry or sense. The walls, however, are remarkably sound, despite their age. Her entry for January 28th details her initial exploration. I have begun a systematic examination of the house, working from top to bottom. The attic contains the expected accumulation of discarded furniture and household items, though organized with unusual precision. Great-Aunt Josephine appears to have been methodical to the point of obsession. Every box is labeled, every trunk inventoried. Most curious are the marks on the floorboards, small circles carved at regular intervals, forming patterns that correspond to no obvious purpose. When viewed from the center of the room, they appear to radiate outward like spokes from a wheel. By January 30th, Nora had turned her attention to the sealed rooms in the East Wing. I have located the keys to the locked chambers in a false bottom of the desk in the study. There are 3 rooms arranged sequentially, each opening into the next. The first appears to have been a laboratory of sorts, with shelves of chemical apparatus, much of it antiquated. The second contains medical equipment, surgical instruments primarily, of exceptional quality and unusual design. The third room is empty save for a single chair bolted to the center of the floor. The walls bear stains that suggest regular cleaning with strong solvents. There is a drain in the floor. Initially, Nora appeared determined to establish herself in the community. Town records indicate she applied for certification to practice nursing in Essex County on February 1st, and her journal mentions visits to potential patients. Yet by mid-February, the tone of her entries begins to shift. References to the community grow sparse, while observations about the house itself increase in both frequency and detail. On February 4th, she wrote, "Made the acquaintance of Mrs. Harriet Prescott, who lives in the White House 3 properties distant. She expressed surprise at my occupation of the old Blackwood place, as she termed it. When I identified myself as a Blackwood, she became noticeably reserved. Upon my departure, I overheard her instructing her maid to mark the calendar. The significance of this remains unclear. A receipt from Holbrook's Grocery, dated February 8th, lists items delivered to the house: flour, sugar, coffee, canned goods sufficient for several weeks, and, curiously, 10 pounds of salt. The delivery boy later recounted to his employer that the lady seemed distracted, kept placing her hand against the walls as if feeling for something, paid without counting her change. On February 13th, she wrote, "There is something peculiar about the acoustics in the dining room. When I sit at the table in the evening, I can hear what sounds like conversation from below, though there is nothing beneath but solid foundation. I have inspected the basement thoroughly and found nothing to account for this phenomenon." The basement inspection is detailed in her entry of February 14th. The cellar extends beneath approximately 2/3 of the house, primarily the western portion. The eastern section, including the area beneath the dining room, appears to be solid earth or filled with stone, a curious design choice. The foundation walls are exceptionally thick, nearly 2 feet in some places, composed of granite blocks, fitted with remarkable precision. At several points, copper pipes of unusual diameter emerge from these walls, only to disappear again into the stone. They are not connected to the household plumbing. Their purpose remains obscure. A week later, on February 20th, the sounds continue, not every night, but often enough to establish a pattern. They are most audible between 10 and 11 in the evening, and always cease precisely at the stroke of midnight. I have considered that they might be carried from neighboring houses, but the words, when I can distinguish them, seem oddly antiquated in their phrasing. Last night I clearly heard a woman say, "The bargain must be honored regardless of the cost." There was no response that I could discern. Her entry for February 22nd suggests growing isolation. Mrs. Prescott has withdrawn her request for nursing visits to her elderly mother. She cited improvement in the patient's condition, though this contradicts my own observations. I suspect the true reason lies elsewhere. The grocer's boy now leaves deliveries on the porch rather than bringing them to the kitchen as previously arranged. The house's reputation appears to extend beyond mere superstition. By February 28th, Nora had begun to notice other unusual aspects of the house. The temperature variations within the structure defy explanation. The dining room remains noticeably warmer than adjacent spaces despite identical heating arrangements. The third-floor west bedroom, conversely, is perpetually cold, regardless of fire or weather. Most peculiar is the narrow corridor connecting the main staircase to the east wing. It seems to alternate between extremes, warm as summer one hour and frigid the next, with no discernible pattern. A notation in the record book of Salem Municipal Utilities, dated March 1st, indicates that a meter reader reported unusual findings at the Blackwood property. Residence shows minimal water usage despite confirmed occupancy. Gas consumption exceeds reasonable expectations by factor of 3. Request secondary verification before billing. By early March, Nora's journal entries suggest she had begun to withdraw from the community. Her nursing practice, barely established, appears to have been quietly abandoned. A notation in Dr. Robert Cabot's day book, preserved in the Salem Medical Society archives, reads, "Miss Blackwood has declined to attend Mrs. Gardner's confinement. Claims pressing matters at home require her attention. Peculiar, as she seemed eager for the work just weeks ago." On March 3rd, Nora wrote, "I dreamed of the dining room last night. In the dream, the floorboards had been replaced with glass, revealing a vast chamber below filled with machinery of incomprehensible purpose. Massive gears turned slowly, driven by pistons that rose and fell with the rhythm of breath. At the center was a column of light, pulsing red. I awoke to find myself standing in the dining room, though I have no recollection of leaving my bed." A letter from Thomas Whitaker, dated March 5th, suggests the attorney was monitoring Nora's situation. "Dear Miss Blackwood, it has come to my attention that you have ceased your professional endeavors in town. I feel compelled to remind you that residence in the house constitutes only part of your obligation. The Blackwood legacy requires more active participation. I would be happy to elaborate on these matters at your convenience." Nora's response, if any, has not been preserved. On March 8th, Nora wrote in her journal, "I have discovered a discrepancy in the house plans. The measurements of the ground floor do not correspond to those of the cellar below. There appears to be a space of approximately 12 feet by 14 feet that is unaccounted for. I have examined the floors carefully, but can find no evidence of a trapdoor or access point. The sealed chamber mentioned in the property assessment remains elusive." The same day, she recorded specific measurements. Main structure, 42 feet east to west, 36 feet north to south. Cellar dimensions, 42 feet east to west, but only 22 feet north to south. The discrepancy lies in the southern portion, precisely beneath the dining room. The foundation walls in the cellar show no indication of having been altered or bricked up. It is as if this space were designed to be inaccessible from the beginning. The following day's entry was brief, but significant. "The knocking has begun." What Nora meant by this cryptic statement is clarified in subsequent entries. She described distinct rapping sounds emanating from behind the walls of the dining room, 3 quick knocks, followed by 2 slow ones, repeated at intervals throughout the night. Unlike the voices, which followed a predictable schedule, the knocking occurred at random hours, often waking her from sleep. Her March 10th entry elaborates. "The knocking begins in the east wall and travels clockwise around the room, completing a full circuit before beginning again. It maintains perfect rhythm, never hastening or slowing. I have attempted to communicate by knocking in response, but this produces no variation in the pattern." Most disturbing is the sensation that accompanies the sound, a subtle vibration felt through the floorboards, as if something large were shifting its weight below. A receipt from Ambrose Hardware dated March 11th lists the purchase of tools, a hammer, chisel, measuring tape, and carpenter's square. The proprietor later recalled that Nora had inquired about the best methods for examining wall spaces without causing structural damage. March 12th, I have removed a section of wainscoting in the dining room to examine the wall structure. The space between the lath and exterior sheathing contains the expected insulating materials, but also copper tubing, similar to that observed in the cellar. The tubes are warm to the touch and seem to pulse slightly under pressure, though this may be my imagination. I replaced the paneling without further investigation. Something tells me it would be unwise to disturb these elements further. By mid-March, Nora had begun researching the history of the house and its previous occupants. Her journal records visits to the Essex Institute, now the Peabody Essex Museum, and the Town Records Office. I have discovered that the property was built in 1831 by Jeremiah Blackwood, my great-grandfather, she wrote on March 18th. Before that, the land appears to have been unoccupied since the early settlement period. Curiously, there is a 20-year gap in the ownership records between Jeremiah's death in 1856 and when his son Thomas, my grandfather's brother, reclaimed it in 1876. Where was the house during those decades? Who resided in it? The records are mysteriously silent. Her research notes, found interleaved with the journal, contain additional details. Jeremiah Blackwood, born 1798 in Bristol, England, arrived Salem 1820, listed profession, merchant, specialized in exotic goods and medical curiosities, married Elizabeth Hathorne, distant relation to Nathaniel, in 1822. One son, Thomas, born 1825. Elizabeth died 1830, circumstances unrecorded. Jeremiah began construction of the house in 1831, completed 1833. Property described in contemporary accounts as unusual in design and appointment. Jeremiah known locally for scientific interests, particularly anatomy and physiology. Maintained correspondence with medical researchers in Europe, including controversial figures like Andrew Cross and Giovanni Aldini. On March 19th, she added, Thomas Blackwood, according to town records, left Salem following his father's death in 1856. His whereabouts during the subsequent 2 decades are unrecorded. He returned in 1876, reclaiming the family property, which had apparently stood vacant. Marriage records indicate he wed Margaret Frost of Ipswich in 1877. No children resulted from this union. Margaret died in 1891, cause listed as nervous exhaustion, a suspiciously vague diagnosis. Thomas continued to occupy the house until his death in 1895, at which point it passed to his cousin's daughter, Josephine Blackwood. A curious footnote appears in the margin of this entry. Town gossip, according to the librarian at the Essex Institute, held that Thomas returned from Europe with foreign notions and unsavory practices. He was rarely seen in town, conducting business through intermediaries. Deliveries to the house occurred only at night. The property gained a reputation for unusual sounds and lights at odd hours. On March 21st, Nora documented a significant finding. I have located a reference to the house in an 1845 letter from Dr. Oliver Wendell Holmes to a colleague in Philadelphia. Holmes writes, "The Blackwood residence on the North River represents a curious example of architectural physiology, a term coined by the owner himself. Jeremiah Blackwood has confidentially shared certain aspects of his design philosophy, which he claims marries biological principles with structural engineering. While I find his theories fantastical, I cannot deny the effectiveness of certain innovations he has implemented, particularly regarding thermal regulation and acoustic properties. The house, he claims, functions as a unified organism rather than an assemblage of inert materials. I humored him, of course, though I suspect his scientific enthusiasm exceeds his rational judgment." On March 23rd, Nora made a discovery that appears to have altered the course of her investigation. Her journal entry for that day begins with unusual excitement. "I have found something extraordinary. While examining the bookshelves in what was once Great-Aunt Josephine's study, I noticed that one section of the wall behind them sounds hollow when tapped. After removing several volumes, I discovered a small brass lever concealed behind Gray's Anatomy. When pulled, it releases a mechanism that allows a portion of the bookcase to swing outward, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. What Nora found at the bottom of those stairs is not immediately detailed in her journal. The entry ends abruptly with that discovery, and the next entry, dated March 25th, begins. I have not slept for 2 nights. What I found in that hidden chamber defies rational explanation, yet I have examined it with the critical eye of my medical training and cannot dismiss what I have seen. The room itself is small and windowless, lined with shelves containing dozens of leather-bound journals dating back to 1831. They are the private records of my ancestors, each continuing where the previous left off. She continues, the chamber contains something else as well, a desk with a single drawer, locked with a key I found suspended from a chain around the neck of a small anatomical model of the human heart. Inside the drawer was a collection of drawings, architectural in nature, but annotated with biological terminology. They appear to be the original design schematics for this house, though unlike any architectural plans I have ever encountered. The structure is depicted not merely in terms of load-bearing walls and foundation elements, but as systems akin to circulatory, respiratory, and nervous networks. Annotations refer to nutrient delivery channels, waste extraction pathways, and most disturbing, sensory input nodes. The contents of these journals, as described by Nora in her subsequent entries, revealed a disturbing family legacy. According to her account, Jeremiah Blackwood had not been merely a prosperous merchant, as town histories recorded, but a practitioner of what he termed physiological experimentation. His journals detailed procedures that pushed the boundaries of medical knowledge of his time and ethical constraints. On March 27th, Nora wrote, I have read through Jeremiah's early journals. He writes of seeking the mechanism by which life is sustained beyond its natural conclusion. His experiments began with animals, but progressed to human subjects by 1840. These were not random selections, but individuals carefully chosen for specific physical attributes. He refers repeatedly to the perfect alignment and vessels of uncommon resilience. Where he acquired these subjects is not explicitly stated, though he makes reference to arrangements with ship captains and to specimens from the almshouse. Her transcription of a journal entry from 1842 reads, Success at last. Subject 17 demonstrates unprecedented compatibility with the preparatory solutions. The heart, removed while still beating, continued its rhythm for 73 minutes when suspended in the modified preservation fluid. More remarkable still, when connected to the experimental apparatus, it maintained sufficient pressure to circulate the fluid through the entire system of tubes. I believe I have found the cornerstone upon which my grand design will rest. The house shall live, and through it, so shall I. Nora's commentary follows. The implications of these passages are horrifying. Jeremiah appears to have been developing some method of sustaining organs outside the body, a concept not entirely foreign to modern medical research, but his applications venture into the realm of the grotesque. The house he refers to is clearly this structure, designed apparently to incorporate biological elements into its very framework. The following day's entry contains a passage that suggests Nora's growing distress. The journals of Thomas, who continued his father's work after returning to Salem in 1876, contain detailed anatomical drawings that correspond to spaces within the walls and beneath the floors of this house. If I am interpreting these correctly, and I pray that I am not, the very structure itself was designed to serve some physiological purpose. The house is not merely a container for their experiments. It is itself the experiment. She elaborates. Thomas writes of perfecting the integration and achieving genuine symbiosis. His approach seems more sophisticated than his father's, employing techniques he claims to have learned in Vienna and Paris. He refers frequently to electrical stimulation of preserved tissues and chemical preservation methods unknown to conventional science. Most disturbing are his references to his wife, Margaret, whom he describes as the ideal conduit and genetically optimal for resonance with the central system. What became of her is suggested in a single chilling entry from 1891. M has finally fulfilled her purpose. The transfer was completed at midnight. The heart accepts her contribution. The house grows stronger. Nora's research notes from March 29th indicate she had begun cross-referencing the journals with medical records. I visited Dr. Latham again today, inquiring specifically about Great-Aunt Josephine's condition before death. Though reluctant, he eventually revealed that she suffered from progressive anemia of unknown origin. Blood work showed decreasing volume with no evident cause. No hemorrhaging, no bloody excretions, simply a gradual diminishment as if the blood were being drawn out slowly over time. He attributed it to an obscure autoimmune condition. I believe otherwise. By early April, Nora's journal entries become increasingly fragmented. References to unusual phenomena within the house multiply. Unexplained temperature fluctuations, particularly in the dining room. The persistent smell of copper and salt in rooms that had been empty for days, and most disturbing, the sensation of movement within the walls. April the 2nd, I have noticed a correlation between my physical condition and certain states of the house. When the dining room grows unusually warm, I experience fatigue and lightheadedness. When the knocking begins, my pulse accelerates regardless of my activities. Most telling, perhaps, is the cut I sustained while slicing bread 3 days ago. It refuses to heal properly, reopening each night while I sleep. I awake to find a thin trickle of blood has soaked into the sheets. The quantity is minimal, yet the persistence is concerning. April 3rd. I examined my wound under magnification today and discovered something inexplicable. The edges of the cut appear to be lined with microscopic structures resembling capillary tubes, all oriented inward toward the open flesh. They are unlike any anatomical feature I have encountered in my medical training. When I attempted to extract one for closer examination, it withdrew deeper into the tissue. I feel I am being consumed by degrees. The house breathes, she wrote on April 5th. I can find no other way to describe it. There is a rhythm to its sounds, not just the knocking now, but a slow, measured cadence that suggests inhalation and exhalation. I have timed it, 14 seconds, from beginning to end, consistent with the respiratory rate of an adult at rest. The same day, she noted, I have begun to feel watched, not merely within the house, but by the house itself. The sensation is strongest in the dining room, where I sometimes fancy the walls themselves are observing me. I conducted an experiment today, placed a drop of my blood from my still unhealed wound upon the floor and watched as it was absorbed with unusual rapidity. Within moments the knocking began, 3 quick, 2 slow, though it was not the usual hour for such manifestations. A letter from Thomas Whitaker, dated April 7th, suggests escalating concern. Dear Miss Blackwood, I must insist upon a meeting at your earliest convenience. It has been brought to my attention by certain parties that lights have been observed in your residence at unusual hours, and that you have been making inquiries of a disturbing nature regarding your family's history. These matters require discussion. The obligations of your inheritance are not to be taken lightly, nor investigated indiscriminately. Please respond by return post to arrange an appointment. Nora's journal entry for April 8th mentions this communication. Received another letter from Whitaker today. His tone suggests he knows more about the house than he has previously indicated. I have no intention of meeting with him or anyone else connected to this abomination. My investigation must proceed without interference. I have begun to suspect that the law firm has served as custodian of the Blackwood secret for generations, ensuring the succession of suitable residents. That I was selected from among distant relations now seems less a matter of chance than careful calculation. On April 10th, Nora recorded making another significant discovery. In the last of Thomas's journals, dated 1895, the year of his death, he makes reference to the chamber beneath the dining room where the heart resides. This must be the sealed space mentioned in the property assessment. I have spent hours examining the floor, tapping and measuring, and have located what appears to be a seam in the floorboards that forms a perfect square, 10 feet on each side. There is no visible handle or mechanism to open it. The same day, she noted physical symptoms. My condition deteriorates. The wound on my hand now exhibits a curious pattern around its edges, a tracery of fine blue lines extending outward beneath the skin, resembling the copper tubes within the walls. I am constantly fatigued, yet find sleep impossible. When I do drift off, I dream of a vast, pulsing organ suspended in fluid, connected to countless tubes that extend in all directions. In the dream, the tubes terminate in needles that seek my flesh. What followed this discovery marked a turning point in Nora's account. On April 11th, she wrote only, "I have heard my name called from beneath the floor, not in a whisper, but clearly articulated in a woman's voice. It called 3 times during dinner, and once more as I was preparing for bed. The voice is familiar somehow, though I cannot place it." April 12th. The calling continues. It is Josephine's voice. I am certain of it now, though I never met her in life. How I recognize it is a mystery I cannot explain. She calls not in distress, but in summons, as one would call a child to dinner. There is an expectation in her tone that I will answer, that I will open the way and descend. The knocking has intensified, no longer confined to the dining room, but traveling throughout the house in complex patterns. It follows me from room to room, always the same cadence. 3 quick, 2 slow. On April 13th, I woke this morning to find a perfect circle of blood on my nightgown, directly over my heart. There is no wound, no explanation for its appearance. When I tried to wash the fabric, the water in the basin turned not pink, but blue, with the metallic scent I have come to associate with the house itself. I burned the nightgown in the kitchen stove. The flames burned green. For the next week, Nora's entries detail her increasingly desperate attempts to locate the mechanism that would open the sealed chamber beneath the dining room. She described removing floorboards, searching for hidden levers similar to the one that had revealed the staircase, and even attempting to break through with tools purchased from the hardware store on Essex Street. April 14th. I have examined every inch of the dining room floor with no success. The seam is visible only in certain lights, typically at dawn or dusk, when shadows are most pronounced. It measures exactly 10 feet square, centered in the room. The boards within this square are indistinguishable from those surrounding it, yet sound different when struck, a deeper resonance suggesting space below. I have attempted to pry up the boards but found them impossibly secure, as if fused at the edges. April 15th. A peculiar discovery, the pattern of nails securing the floorboards within the square forms a distinctive arrangement when viewed from above. They trace the outline of what appears to be a human heart, anatomically accurate in all details. This cannot be coincidence. I believe it may be key to the opening mechanism, though how to activate it eludes me still. A receipt from Salem Hardware, dated April 16, 1906, lists her purchases: 1 sledgehammer, 1 pry bar, 1 oil lamp, and 20 feet of rope. The clerk noted on the back of the receipt, Miss Blackwood appeared agitated, claimed the items were for repairs to her cellar stairs. Her hands were blistered and dirty, most unusual for a lady of her standing. Her journal entry for that date reads, "My efforts with conventional tools have proven futile. The floor resists the sledgehammer as if made of iron rather than wood. The pry bar bent rather than shift the boards. Most telling, perhaps, is that each strike produces the sound of knocking elsewhere in the house, 3 quick, 2 slow, as if in mockery of my attempts. I am being toyed with by this abomination, this hybrid of architecture and anatomy that my ancestors created." April 17th. I slept in the dining room last night, or attempted to, laid a blanket directly upon the sealed square and waited, listening. Near midnight, I felt it, a movement beneath me, subtle but unmistakable, like the expansion of lungs drawing breath. More disturbing still was the warmth that seemed to radiate upward through the floor, accompanied by a faint but discernible rhythm. When I placed my ear against the wood, I heard not knocking, but a wet, pulsing sound that might have been liquid moving through confined spaces, or a heart beating within a chest. On April 18th, Nora's journal contains a breakthrough. I have found it. Not a lever or handle, as I expected, but a sequence. The knocking I have heard since March, 3 quick raps, followed by 2 slow ones, when repeated upon the center of the sealed square, activates some mechanism within. I discovered this quite by accident while pacing in frustration. The floor shifted beneath me just slightly, and when I repeated the pattern deliberately, I heard the unmistakable sound of metal sliding against metal. Tomorrow, I will open it. A telegram sent from the Salem Western Union office that evening, addressed to Dr. Eleanor Chandler in Boston, suggests Nora anticipated danger. Have made significant discovery. Stop if no communication from me. By April 25th, contact authorities. Stop search. Beneath dining room. Stop burn everything. Stop your friend N. Blackwood. Dr. Chandler's response, dated April 19th. Message received with concern. Stop, what have you found? Stop, shall I come to Salem? Query reply urgently. Stoppy Chandler. There is no record of Nora having replied to this telegram. The entry for April 19th is the longest in the journal, covering several pages in increasingly erratic handwriting. It begins, "What lies beneath the dining room defies medical science as I understand it, yet I cannot deny the evidence before me." The chamber itself is circular, approximately 15 feet in diameter, with walls of fitted stone that show no mortar or joining. At its center stands a column of what appears to be glass, but is warm to the touch, a cylinder reaching from floor to ceiling, filled with a clear fluid that has not clouded or evaporated despite its apparent age. The journal continues, "The chamber is illuminated by a phosphorescent glow emanating from the fluid itself, sufficient to reveal details without additional light. The floor is concave, sloping gently toward the central column, with channels carved into the stone that converge like tributaries to a river. These channels contain traces of dried residue that I dared not examine too closely, though its rusty color suggests its nature." What Nora describes seeing within this cylinder has been the subject of debate among historians and medical experts who have studied her account. According to her journal, suspended in the fluid was what appeared to be a human heart, vastly enlarged and connected to an elaborate system of copper tubes that extend into the walls, floor, and ceiling of the chamber. The heart beats, slowly but unmistakably, with the same 14-second rhythm I have observed in the house itself. The tubes pulse with its contractions, carrying some fluid throughout the structure. Her description grows more detailed. The heart itself is unlike any anatomical specimen I have encountered. While recognizably human in its general form, it has been grotesquely modified. Additional chambers have been constructed, seemingly grafted onto the original tissue. The aorta and other major vessels have been extended and reinforced with a metal that resembles copper, but bears an iridescent quality I cannot identify. Most disturbing are the additional structures attached to its surface, small, nodule-like formations that periodically contract independently of the main organ, each connected to its own network of smaller tubes. Most disturbing was Nora's claim that the heart responded to her presence. When I approached the cylinder, the heart's rhythm accelerated noticeably. The tubes began to pulse more rapidly, and I heard the house respond, creaking and settling as if adjusting to a sudden exertion. I felt lightheaded, and noted my own pulse had synchronized with the rhythm I observed. I retreated quickly to the dining room, sealing the chamber behind me. She continues, "As I stood in the dining room, struggling to comprehend what I had witnessed, blood began to seep from the cut on my hand, not the slow trickle I had grown accustomed to, but a steady flow that ran down my arm and dripped onto the floor. Where it fell upon the sealed square, it disappeared instantly, as if absorbed by some unseen mechanism. The knocking began immediately thereafter, 3 quick, 2 slow, from all directions at once, deafening in its intensity. April 20th. I have not returned to the chamber, though the knocking continues without cease. It has spread throughout the house, walls and floors and ceilings, all participating in this macabre percussion. Sleep is impossible. I have barricaded myself in the study, surrounded by the journals of my ancestors, seeking some explanation for what I have discovered. Jeremiah's earliest writings provide some illumination, though they raise as many questions as they answer. She transcribes a passage dated 1837. The principle of sympathetic resonance is key to the entire enterprise. Just as a violin string will vibrate when its harmonic is played nearby, so too can a living system be induced to resonate with another of sufficient similarity. The house must be more than a mere structure. It must be a tuning fork that vibrates in harmony with its occupant, drawing forth the essence that conventional science fails to recognize. The heart is merely the beginning, the first component of what will eventually become a complete translocation of consciousness from fragile human form to enduring architecture. Nora comments, Jeremiah believed he could achieve a form of immortality by transferring his consciousness into the structure he created. The heart in the chamber must be his own, somehow preserved and modified to serve as the central component of this mad experiment. Yet, if the journals are to be believed, he died before completing his work. Thomas continued it, and ultimately Josephine as well. But to what end? And what is the nature of the bargain I heard mentioned in those disembodied conversations weeks ago? In the days that followed this discovery, Nora's journal entries suggest a rapid deterioration in her mental state. She reported difficulty sleeping, constant awareness of the heart's rhythm, and the persistent sensation of being observed. The walls have eyes, she wrote on April 22nd. Not literal eyes, but some means of perception. I feel it tracking my movements throughout the house. When I remain in one place for too long, the knocking begins. 3 quick, 2 slow, as if summoning me. April 23rd. I attempted to leave the house today, packed a small bag with essentials, and proceeded to the front door, only to find myself overcome with weakness upon touching the handle. My vision blurred, breath shortened, and I felt a crushing pressure in my chest, as if my own heart were being compressed. When I retreated from the door, the symptoms subsided immediately. I tried the back entrance with identical results. I am a prisoner here, bound by physiological restraints I cannot explain. April 24th. The wound on my hand has developed alarming characteristics. The blue lines now extend past my wrist and up my arm, branching like veins but visible through the skin. When I press them, I feel not pain, but a curious resonance, as if touching a tuning fork. More disturbing still, they pulse visibly with the same rhythm as the heart beneath the dining room. I have tried cutting them with a scalpel from the East Wing laboratory, but they retreat deeper into the tissue, beyond my reach. By the end of April, Nora had begun researching methods to destroy what she had found. Her journal references texts on chemistry and combustibles, borrowed from the Essex Institute. A librarian's log from that period notes, Miss Blackwood has requested some unusual materials regarding industrial chemicals and their properties. When questioned about her interest, she claimed to be writing a paper on fire safety in domestic settings. Her appearance has become concerning, significant weight loss, and an unnatural pallor. April 27th. I have determined that conventional means will not suffice to destroy what lurks beneath this house. The structure has incorporated biological elements that may render it resistant to ordinary fire. The journal suggests that previous attempts to dismantle portions of the house resulted in autonomous regeneration, a concept more botanical than architectural. I require something that will destroy not merely wood and plaster, but organic tissue as well. April 28th. My research suggests that a combination of potassium chlorate and sulfuric acid, properly deployed, might generate heat sufficient to consume even modified organic matter. The chemicals are available through medical supply channels, ostensibly for laboratory use. I have dispatched orders to 3 separate suppliers in Boston, using my professional credentials to avoid suspicion. The house knows something is amiss. The knocking has taken on a frantic quality, and the calls from beneath the floor have become nearly constant. A telegraph receipt found among Nora's effects indicates she sent another message to Dr. Chandler on April 30th. Situation deteriorating. Stop, house appears sentient. Stop, attempting resolution through chemical means. Stop, if unsuccessful. Consider this my final communication. Stop, forgive me. Stop, Blackwood. May 1st. The chemicals have arrived. I have concealed them in the attic, as far from the heart chamber as possible within the confines of the house. My condition worsens daily. The blue lines have reached my shoulder and begun to extend across my chest toward my heart. I experience episodes of lost time, periods where I find myself standing in the dining room with no memory of having gone there. Last night, I awoke to discover myself kneeling beside the sealed square, my palm pressed flat against it, a small pool of blood forming beneath my hand from a fresh wound I have no recollection of receiving. May the 2nd. I have begun mixing the compounds according to the formula described in Thorpe's Dictionary of Applied Chemistry. The process requires precision, as the resulting mixture will be highly combustible and dangerous to transport. My plan is to position charges at strategic points throughout the house, with the largest concentration in the dining room directly above the heart chamber. The difficulty lies in creating a delivery system that will allow me sufficient time to escape the structure before ignition. I find myself working with unusual clarity despite my physical deterioration, as if some part of me recognizes this as my final act of defiance against whatever my ancestors set in motion. On May 3rd, Nora made a final discovery that appears to have confirmed her worst fears. I have found Great Aunt Josephine's personal journal concealed within the hidden staircase in a compartment I had previously overlooked. The last entry, dated September 1896, reads, "I can no longer bear what this house requires of me. The bargain made by Jeremiah cannot be undone by my hand, for I have already given too much of myself to it. The heart must be fed. The lineage must continue. I have arranged for Nora to inherit when I am gone. Her medical training makes her ideal. She will understand what must be done. May she forgive me for what I could not finish," she continues. Earlier entries in Josephine's journal reveal the horrifying truth. The bargain referenced was not metaphorical, but literal, a transaction with forces beyond conventional understanding. Jeremiah discovered, during his European travels, certain principles believed to allow the transference of consciousness from one vessel to another. He sought immortality, not through spiritual means, but physical translation, the preservation of his essential self within a structure designed to receive and sustain it. The process, however, requires regular nourishment in the form of biological material from compatible donors, specifically those sharing certain genetic characteristics with the original subject. In simple terms, the house requires Blackwood blood to maintain the heart that drives it. Josephine, like the women before her, had been slowly drained over decades, her essence literally incorporated into the structure around her. Nora's outrage is evident in her commentary. The pattern is clear now. Male Blackwoods designed and created this abomination. Female Blackwoods were selected as its sustenance. The absence of direct male heirs in recent generations necessitated reaching further into the family tree, hence my selection as inheritor, despite having never met Josephine. I was not chosen for familial sentiment but utilitarian purpose, a fresh supply for a hungry system. The medical training was merely a convenience, ensuring I would understand enough to maintain the mechanism, but perhaps not enough to destroy it. This entry appears to have prompted Nora's final actions. On May 4th, she wrote, "The preparations are complete. I have positioned the chemical charges at 27 points throughout the house, with ignition mechanisms connected to a central timing device adapted from a clock mechanism found in the East Wing laboratory. The largest concentration is directly above the heart chamber, calculated to burn through the floor and destroy what lies beneath. I have soaked the floorboards with accelerant to ensure rapid penetration. The house knows what I intend. The knocking has ceased entirely, replaced by a low, constant vibration that resonates through the structure. The air feels thick, resistant to my movements, as if the very atmosphere within the walls has turned against me. Most disturbing is the change in the blue lines across my chest. They have begun to pulsate visibly, and where they converge near my heart, the skin has grown transparent, revealing something beneath that moves independently of my own pulse. I fear that the process of incorporation has already begun, that some aspect of the house now resides within me as well as around me. I must act quickly before my resolve is compromised or my autonomy further eroded. On May 5th, she wrote what would be the last entry in her journal. I understand now what has happened to the women of my family. The heart beneath the dining room is not merely an anatomical specimen preserved through some miraculous process. It is the source of the house's unnatural persistence, and it requires sustenance that only those of Blackwood blood can provide. Great-Aunt Josephine did not die of natural causes, as I was led to believe. She gave herself to the house, just as the women before her had done. The property transfers only to female descendants because we are the only suitable vessels. The blue lines have reached my heart. I feel a doubling of sensation, my own pulse, and another, stronger rhythm that seeks to overwhelm it. When I close my eyes, I see not darkness but the interior of the house from countless perspectives simultaneously, as if viewing it through multiple sets of eyes embedded within the walls. I hear voices, Josephine, Margaret, others I cannot name, all calling me to join them, to surrender to the greater whole they now comprise. She concluded, I will not follow in their footsteps. Tonight I will end this abomination. I have prepared the necessary materials. By morning, nothing will remain but ashes. If I do not survive, let this journal serve as testimony to what existed here, and as warning to any who might consider rebuilding upon this cursed ground. To whoever finds these words, burn this journal, scatter the ashes. Let no trace remain of the Blackwood legacy or the knowledge that enabled its creation. A final note scrawled in the margin. It is nearly midnight. The timer is set for 2 a.m. I have placed this journal in the metal box from Jeremiah's laboratory, which should protect it from the flames. Perhaps it is vanity to want some record to survive, but I cannot bear the thought of dying unremembered, unwitnessed. The blue lines now cover my chest entirely. I feel the house reaching for me, not in anger but in hunger. It knows what I intend, yet seems strangely unresistant, as if confident in its ability to overcome my efforts. The knocking has resumed, 3 quick, 2 slow, but not from the walls. It comes from within my own chest. What happened that night is documented in multiple sources. According to the Salem Fire Department records, a blaze was reported at the Blackwood house at approximately 2:17 a.m. on May 6, 1906. By the time firefighters arrived, the structure was fully engulfed. The fire chief's report states, the intensity of the blaze was unusual, suggesting an accelerant was used. Most peculiar was the color of the flames, which several of my men described as having a greenish tint, particularly at the center of the structure. The report continues. Attempts to extinguish the fire were hampered by equipment failures of an unprecedented nature. 2 hose lines burst simultaneously despite being recently inspected. The water pressure fluctuated wildly without apparent cause. Most alarming was the behavior of the flames themselves, which seemed to retreat from direct application of water only to reappear elsewhere in the structure with increased intensity. Lieutenant Sullivan reported that portions of the house appeared to bleed when struck by the water stream, a reddish liquid that mixed with the runoff and emitted a powerful copper odor. The fire burned for nearly 6 hours before it was extinguished. The house was completely destroyed, with only the stone foundation remaining. Curiously, the fire did not spread to neighboring properties despite strong winds that night. as if contained by some invisible barrier. The Salem Evening News reported the incident on May 7th. Tragic fire claims historic home and occupant. The residence of Miss Nora Blackwood, recently arrived from Boston, was destroyed in an early morning blaze. Miss Blackwood is presumed to have perished, though recovery efforts have been hampered by unusual structural collapse. The cellar appears to have caved in completely, creating a pit that continues to smolder despite copious application of water. A more detailed account appears in the personal journal of Frederick Merrill, a firefighter present at the scene. Never in 15 years of service have I witnessed such a fire. The flames moved with purpose, curling and flowing like liquid rather than fire. When we directed the hoses toward what remained of the dining room, where the chief believed the occupant might be found, the entire floor collapsed into the cellar with a sound like a scream. The pit revealed glowed with an intensity that forced us back. Strangest of all was the momentary glimpse I caught of something in the heart of that inferno, a glass column containing what appeared to be a massive, pulsating organ, somehow intact despite the heat surrounding it. When I directed my colleagues' attention to it, the debris shifted, concealing it from view. No human remains were ever officially recovered from the site. The Essex County Coroner's Report, dated May 10, 1906, lists Nora Blackwood as deceased by misadventure, fire, despite the absence of a body. The document notes, given the temperature of the blaze as reported by fire officials, complete consumption of human remains is plausible, if uncommon. Dr. Eleanor Chandler arrived in Salem on May 8th, having received no response to her telegrams. Her statement to local authorities, preserved in police records, indicates she attempted to provide information about Nora's concerns. Miss Blackwood contacted me regarding disturbing discoveries at her residence. She believed the house contained architectural anomalies with potentially dangerous properties. Her communications suggested increasing agitation and possible delusion, though she had no prior history of mental instability. I regret not responding more promptly to what I dismissed as overwork and isolation. When questioned about the specific nature of these dangerous properties, Dr. Chandler reportedly stated, Miss Blackwood described biological components integrated into the structure itself, a concept so fantastic I attributed it to exhaustion or nervous collapse. She mentioned particular concern about something beneath the dining room floor. Given the circumstances of the fire, I feel obligated to report these details, however improbable they may seem. The property remained vacant after the fire, passing to the town of Salem as stipulated in the original inheritance conditions. Multiple attempts to rebuild on the site over the subsequent decades were abandoned under curious circumstances. Construction records from 1912, 1927, and 1941 all document projects that began with foundation work but were halted due to unforeseen complications or worker concerns regarding site conditions. The 1912 attempt, undertaken by Northeastern Development Corporation, ended after 3 workers reported identical symptoms: weakness, dizziness, and unexplained lacerations on their palms that appeared overnight and refused to heal. The foreman's report cites unstable ground conditions and possible methane pockets as the official reason for abandonment. In 1927, Essex County Construction began excavation for a small apartment building. Work ceased after discovery of what company records describe as an anomalous stone chamber, approximately 8 feet below grade, not indicated on any survey or municipal record. The chamber was reportedly filled with concrete, and the project relocated to an alternative site without explanation. The 1941 project, a proposed air raid shelter commissioned by the Civil Defense Authority, was terminated after preliminary soil samples revealed unusual chemical composition inconsistent with documented geological conditions in the area. The samples, according to laboratory reports, contained elevated levels of copper, iron, and organic compounds typically associated with blood or tissue preservation. In 1957, during a town expansion project, excavation of the site revealed something that brought Nora Blackwood's account back into consideration. Workers digging to prepare for a new foundation discovered a circular chamber approximately 8 feet beneath where the dining room would have stood. The chamber was precisely as Nora had described it, 15 feet in diameter with walls of fitted stone, showing no mortar. The official report, filed by site engineer Harold Whitman, stated, "The chamber appears to have survived the 1906 fire intact, protected by its depth and stone construction. At its center stands a cylindrical column of unknown material, approximately 3 feet in diameter and reaching from floor to ceiling. The column shows signs of damage. A significant crack runs its length, but remains structurally intact. Most unusual are the copper tubes extending from its base into the surrounding earth. These tubes, though tarnished, show no signs of deterioration commensurate with their age." The report continued, "Upon closer inspection, the cylinder appears to contain a viscous fluid that has partially leaked through the crack. Suspended within this fluid is an object that bears superficial resemblance to a human heart, though its size, approximately 3 times normal, suggests this is either a fabrication or some form of anatomical anomaly preserved for study. The object shows no signs of decomposition despite its apparent age." A supplementary note marked confidential and discovered only during the digitization of town records in 1998 adds, "Preliminary analysis of the fluid by the university laboratory indicates it contains compounds unknown to current chemical taxonomy. The suspension medium appears to have preservative properties beyond conventional understanding. The organic material within, presumed artificial, exhibits characteristics consistent with viable tissue, elasticity, responsiveness to electrical stimulation, and, most disturbingly, evidence of nutritive consumption when provided with compatible organic material." A memo from the mayor's office dated June 18, 1957, directs all materials removed from the Blackwood site to be transferred to federal custody per arrangement with Department of Defense representatives. Site to be filled and designated as municipal green space. No further excavation permitted without executive approval. All personnel involved to sign non-disclosure agreements as condition of final payment. What happened to this discovery remains contested. The official town records indicate that the chamber was filled with concrete and the excavation abandoned in favor of creating what is now a small public park. However, unofficial accounts from workers present at the site suggest that before the chamber was sealed, something unusual occurred. According to a statement given by Raymond Collins, a laborer on the project, to the Salem Historical Society in 1968, when Mr. Whitman extracted a sample of the fluid from around that thing in the cylinder, it moved. Not just settled or shifted like you'd expect something in liquid to do, but contracted like a muscle. Every man on that site saw it, though most won't admit it now. And the sound it made, a wet sucking noise that seemed to come from everywhere at once. We all heard the knocking after that, 3 quick, 2 slow, over and over, until they poured the concrete. Collins continued, "That wasn't the worst of it, though. The next morning, Whitman didn't show up for work. When they checked his hotel room, they found him in the bathtub, wrists slashed. Thing is, there wasn't nearly enough blood in that tub for the wounds he had. And on his chest, I saw this when they brought the body out, there were these blue lines like veins, but visible on the outside of the skin. They formed a pattern that looked just like the tube system we found in that chamber." The official report said suicide due to work-related stress, but everyone who saw him knew there was more to it. The park that now stands on the site of the Blackwood house is rarely frequented by locals, despite its convenient location. Residents of nearby homes have reported unusual sounds, particularly at night, described variously as a liquid rushing through pipes and rhythmic thumping beneath the ground. These reports spike notably in January, around the anniversary of Nora's inheritance. In 1979, ground-penetrating radar was used to survey the park as part of a geological study. The resulting images showed an anomaly approximately 20 feet below the surface, well beneath the concrete-filled chamber. When questioned about this finding, the study's director stated only that subsurface features in Salem are often complicated by the area's unique geological history, and declined further comment. The radar images, obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests in 2001, show what appears to be a network of tubular structures extending outward from a central mass, reminiscent of a cardiovascular system. The technical report accompanying the images notes, density variations suggest hollow spaces containing fluid or semi-fluid material. Pattern resembles organic rather than geological or man-made structures. Recommend comprehensive core sampling before any development. No such sampling was ever undertaken. The park remains undeveloped, its benches often empty despite the shade offered by carefully planted trees. Visitors occasionally report a peculiar sensation, a vibration felt rather than heard, with a rhythm that specialists have noted matches precisely the average adult resting heart rate. A groundskeeper employed by the Salem Parks Department from 1982 to 1997 reported in an oral history interview, "That park was different from any other I maintained. The grass needed cutting twice as often, grew back almost overnight sometimes. The trees, too, shooting up inches in a week during growing season, had to be something in the soil. But the strangest thing was what happened every January. For about a week, centered around the 17th, the ground would feel warm to the touch, even with snow on it. And if you put your ear to the earth, you could hear something moving down there. Not animals or water pipes, but a sort of slow, steady sound, like something breathing." Most disturbing, perhaps, is the recent discovery made during digitization of Salem's historical records. A birth certificate dated 1875 for Josephine Blackwood lists her mother's name, Nora Blackwood. The document predates Nora's arrival in Salem by more than 3 decades. When this discrepancy was noted by an archivist in 2001, the original certificate was requested for examination. According to county records, it could not be located. Further investigation revealed similar anomalies. A nursing registry from Massachusetts General Hospital documents the employment of a Nora Blackwood from 1899 to 1905, the dates corresponding with Nora's known history. Yet an earlier registry, dated 1845-1850, lists a nurse of the identical name working in the hospital's fever ward. A photograph from 1902 showing the hospital's nursing staff includes a woman identified as Nora Blackwood. Her features, though indistinct in the aged image, bear striking resemblance to those visible in a daguerreotype of Thomas Blackwood's wife Margaret, taken circa 1880. Some local historians suggest that Nora Blackwood never perished in the fire of 1906. They point to a nursing position filled at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston in late May of that year by a woman calling herself Eleanor Black. Hospital records describe her as experienced, though somewhat withdrawn, and note that she bears a significant burn scar on her right hand. The position was abruptly vacated in January 1907, with no forwarding address provided. A patient ledger from the same hospital contains an unusual notation dated January 17, 1907, exactly 1 year after Nora inherited the Blackwood house. E. Black failed to report for duty. Found unconscious in nurse's quarters with unexplained hemorrhaging from circular wound over heart. No external trauma evident. Patient expired despite intervention. Autopsy refused by hospital administration without explanation. Body remanded to Salem authorities per previously filed directive. Others maintain that Nora Blackwood's story is nothing more than a fabrication, a tale constructed around coincidental events and documents taken out of context. They note that no physical evidence conclusively supports the existence of the mechanism she described beneath the house, and that the journal itself, discovered during the 1957 excavation, shows signs of having been written all at once rather than over the period it purports to cover. Skeptics point to inconsistencies in dating, handwriting variations that might suggest multiple authors, and the convenient absence of corroborating witnesses. The more fantastic elements of the account, a preserved functioning heart, architectural biological hybridization, strain scientific credulity, they argue, and are more likely metaphorical expressions of psychological distress than literal descriptions. Dr. Marion Winters, professor of psychology at Salem State University, published a paper in 1998 suggesting that the Blackwood narrative represents a complex psychological projection wherein the house becomes a manifestation of family trauma and inheritance. The heart beneath the dining room symbolizes family secrets. The tubes carrying fluids throughout the structure represent the transmission of intergenerational trauma and obligation. Yet, the knocking continues. Residents whose properties border the park report hearing it on still nights, particularly in winter. Always the same pattern, 3 quick, 2 slow, as if something buried deep beneath the earth were still trying to summon someone to open the way. As if the heart of the Blackwood house, whatever it might have been, continues to beat, waiting for another of the bloodline to answer its call. In 2003, a visiting professor staying in a bed and breakfast adjacent to the park reported waking in the night to find blue lines visible beneath the skin of his arms. He sought medical attention the following day, but by the time he was examined, the marks had disappeared. The attending physician noted only possible allergic reaction to unknown environmental factor. Perhaps most chilling is the demographic study conducted by Salem State University in 2005, which noted an unusual statistical anomaly. Women who spend significant time in or near the park experience heart palpitations at a rate nearly 3 times the national average. The study was discontinued after its primary researcher resigned her position without explanation. According to colleagues, Dr. Eliza Morton had become obsessed with the Blackwood case and began conducting unauthorized excavations in the park after hours. Campus security reported finding her on 3 separate occasions attempting to dig through the topsoil with garden tools. In her office, abandoned after her sudden departure, investigators discovered walls covered with anatomical drawings of the human cardiovascular system interspersed with architectural sketches of the Blackwood house. The drawings appeared to show progressive integration of the 2 systems. Morton's research notes, partially recovered from a corrupted hard drive, contain disturbing entries. The pattern extends beyond the original property boundaries. I've confirmed unusual copper content in soil samples from up to half a mile radius. The distribution forms a pattern identical to human circulatory pathways. This is not metaphorical. The house was only the heart of a much larger system. It may still be growing. Her final documented communication was an email to the university president, sent at 3:17 a.m. on January 17, 2006, exactly 100 years after Nora Blackwood inherited the house. I can hear it calling. 3 quick, 2 slow. The blue lines appeared last night. I understand now what Nora discovered. The house was never destroyed, only the structure above. What matters continues below. It waits, it hungers, it calls to those with compatible blood. I've confirmed my suspicion. I am a distant relation through my maternal grandmother. Eleanor Black was not Nora Blackwood. Nora never left Salem. She's still there, part of it now, and she's calling me home. Dr. Morton's current whereabouts remain unknown. University records indicate she took an indefinite leave of absence for health reasons. Her apartment was found vacated with rent paid 6 months in advance. The only item of note left behind was a small brass key labeled Blackwood in faded ink. The land where the Blackwood house once stood remains green and seemingly peaceful. The trees grow unusually tall. The grass is remarkably lush, even in drought years. A local ordinance passed in 2010 prohibits development of the site in perpetuity, citing historical significance and environmental considerations. The true reason, according to off-the-record comments from a city council member, was a series of unexplained accidents that occurred during a preliminary assessment for potential redevelopment. 3 surveyors hospitalized with identical symptoms, unexplained blood loss, blue tracery visible beneath the skin, and a persistent knocking. Sound that followed them even after they left the site. And occasionally passers-by report the faint smell of copper and salt on the air, a brief metallic tang that fades as quickly as it appears. The heart of Salem keeps its secrets buried deep. But according to those who study the town's darker history, it still beats. 3 quick, 2 slow, waiting for someone to finally answer.